Okay, I actually feel like I'm in a zoo right now, that's for sure. And I feel like a rabbit with mild to moderate to severe tachycardia, but don't worry, I'm going to try and control that. So I'm a pre-hospital and retrieval physician. I know what you're all thinking right now. Every one of you is thinking, that fucker's going to talk about ECMO or pre-hospital ROBOA. No, so pre-hospital care, the future is now. I'm not going to talk about ECMO or ROBOA. I'm, in fact, also not going to talk about pre-hospital CT to diagnose stroke, thankfully. So I'll spare you all that discussion about TPA. I think we're all over it. No, I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to talk about a disease, an epidemic. And that disease is trauma. So trauma kills 14,000 people a day. 14,000 a day. That's 5 million people every year. So that is like wiping out the population of Stuttgart or Sydney like that in 1 year. By 2020, that number will be 8.4 million. Injury alone accounts for 9% of all the deaths in the world every year, and more than 1.5 times the deaths due to HIV/AIDS, TB, and malaria combined. It is the #1 killer in people under 40 years of age. For many of you sitting here today, this is a silent epidemic. You may never get to use your resuscitation and critical care skills to save these patients. You may never actually see them. You may never get to hear about their stories in grand rounds. You may never get to feel their diminishing pulse and stop the dying process. You never get that chance to achieve great saves. It's like a whole different world. Half of all trauma deaths occur within the first hour of injury. In many places where you and I work and live, that first hour of injury is in that different world. It's the pre-hospital world. And sure, like any epidemics, there are non-preventable trauma deaths. A lot of people are destined to die from the immediate outset. But up to 90% of preventable trauma deaths are due to bleeding. They're due to exsanguination. So this is a story about Paul. Paul could be anywhere, any country, any place. Paul gets into his car to drive. He's driving at 100 kilometers an hour. He loses control of his car, and his car goes through a guardrail, smashes through it, down an embankment, and into a rock face. So Paul is initially calling for help. He's unable to call the emergency services, however. There are no witnesses and no bystanders. Paul eventually loses consciousness, and his life ebbs away, and he bleeds. And Paul becomes one of those statistics. So we have to do better. And I'm going to talk today about how we can use technology to do things better. So, what if Paul's accident was witnessed? And what if emergency services were called? So the current process that some of you mightn't be aware of that happens in most countries is a call comes through from a frantic, frenetic individual to an emergency dispatcher. That dispatcher asks a specific script of questions, a predefined script of questions, to try and decide a response priority. Once that is done, emergency crews are responded to the scene. They're sent to the scene. Now, initially, a higher level resource, such as a helicopter emergency medical service, or HEMS, is only sent following their initial assessment, the first ground crew's initial assessment, or in their request. This phase can be associated with a communication blackout. As the initial crews appropriately assess, resuscitate, and treat the critically injured, they do not come up for air to ask for further help until they've done that process. So this phase is sometimes associated with the dark side of the moon. There is a blackout. Now, in some areas, experienced paramedics or HEMS paramedics will actually scan the emergency system and look for jobs to self-task. Overall, the system is not responsive enough. It's not specific, and it's not sensitive enough. We need to do better. We need a different system. We need an early warning system. That technology needs to be more like the meerkat. Thankfully, I didn't have to look after meerkats when I was in the zoo. They poop an awful lot, so it was just the wolves. So the meerkat is the animal world exemplar of the early warning system. The meerkat knows where danger is, it knows how to look out for it, and it knows where it is. Above all, when a single meerkat sounds an alert, there's an immediate and appropriate response from the collective. So pre-hospital trauma response needs to be more like the meerkat. So let's have a look and see how we can apply the meerkat to Paul's case. Paul's a driver in a car. All of you drive cars, I'm sure. We know that Paul is going to get into his car to drive. We know that 25% of all trauma deaths in the world are due to road traffic accidents. Road traffic accidents caused 50 million severe injuries every year. Car crashes have been studied for decades. For all you who are jet lagged, this is a little bit of physics, so try and wake up right now. This is a little bit boring, but bear with me. All right, so kinematics is a study, or the science of physics, on how it affects the human body and the biomechanical injury patterns. We know that kinetic energy translated at various parts of the vehicle causing intrusion is associated with an injury severity and indeed an injury type. Delta V, which is the change in velocity in two vectors from a vehicle from start to finish, is also associated with injury. An example of a high delta V will be two cars hitting one another very quickly at high speed. Or, as in Paul's case, a car smashing into a wall at very high speed and coming to zero. So we do know that we can use mathematics to accurately predict how delta V will affect that occupant. There are other forces involved as well, such as G and torsional forces, which occur in mechanisms such as ejection and rollover. They're also associated with badness. So the question is, how do we know when Paul has been in that car accident? How do we know what the forces are that have been involved? How do we know how fast he was going? How do we know what the intrusion was? How do we know what the key failures in the vehicle itself? So how do we know all this? We need data fast. We need to be able to analyze it and make sense of it. Now, the Formula One motorsport industry has led the way in this. For years, they've been able to grab data very quickly from cars during performance and indeed crashes. And they can send it not just to the pit lane crew, but many thousands of kilometers away in real time to a team of engineers. They can send it at 10 times the speed of broadband. That technology exists today and can be transferred to road vehicles. So, putting it together by using predictive algorithms from kinematics, we can actually come up with a likelihood of injury. We can automate the response. We can automate the dispatcher. And in fact, we can also automate the level of response that's required and when. There's one problem, though. Kinematic studies have indicated that kinematics alone are not accurate enough in predicting injury severity. You all know that. You all know about mechanism of injury. So we need something else. There's something else is required. So this time, Paul has a wearable device on him. In the wristband of his watch is a biosensor. This contains his medical information. It contains his medical history, it contains his allergies, but more importantly, it contains real-time data that can be streamed. It contains his blood pressure, his pulse, his perfusion, his SATs. That can be sent in real time. So when you couple the kinematic data with these data, you can create algorithms that can give far more likelihood in telling whether you've got shock or whether you need to send a response and how. So let's rewind Paul's case. We'll go back. Let's go back to the point when he crashes his car. So Paul has hit the rock face, and already telemetry data is coming from the car and from him, indicating that he's got a 95% chance of severe life-threatening injury. So, immediately, automatically, a ground response and a helicopter response is automatically notified. So the ground response team arrives. They immediately arrive. They have to obviously assess the patient. They have to extricate him, and they have to do some diagnostics. Point-of-care diagnostics are increasing and improving all the time. One of the examples of this is point-of-care thromboelastography, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. So one of the rescuers can be doing that while this process is going on. The monitor you see there on the bonnet of the car has a video in it that is streaming data from the patient, not just to the rescuers, but also in real time to the helicopter doctors and paramedics, and also to the trauma center. There are no leads, no wires getting in the way. It's all remote or wireless coming from his wristband. Part of that primary survey that's been done by the rescue crew here is an ultrasound. Now, the sonographer here is not trained in ultrasound image interpretation, but he is trained in probe placement and image acquisition. So by using wireless technology, the HEMS team are able to assist in remote interpretation of the ultrasound, of the fast scan. Not just that, they're actually able to help with remote clinical decision assistance. So that also goes to deciding when to intervene and able to look at a response to an intervention. The vital signs are constantly being streamed.
I agree, there's free fluid in the abdomen. There's a pneumothorax. Safe sting press the chest.
Okay, so the HEMS team are on the way. The ground crew are continuing. They're interacting all the time. So despite not knowing one another, and despite the noise and challenging environment, the HEMS team and this ground team are one team. They're connected in real time with physiology. They can both see the patient. They can hear what's going on. They have a shared mental model. They both know what the treatment is going to be. This is pit lane medicine. But not just this team are being responded to. In the major trauma center, the trauma team leader is actually also automatically notified, and he's able to visualize the patient and see what's going on in real time. Meanwhile, back at the blood bank, data is coming through to the blood bank immediately. We know that this patient is bleeding from non-compressible torso hemorrhage. We know that he needs definitive surgery or definitive hemorrhage control. Now, that may be interventional radiology, it may be a temporizing Reboa procedure, it may be a trauma laparotomy. Blood products are the currency that allows shocked trauma patients get to the trauma center alive, or gives them a higher likelihood of that. Blood products will give a person a longer chance of survival before definitive care. But how are we going to get these blood products to the patient rapidly? HEMS crews are limited in the blood product type and amount that they can store and carry. So we need new technology. And drone technology can help answer that question. Drones are improving all the time in the distance they can fly, in the amount of products they can carry, and the types of products they can carry. So as the data keeps streaming through, the indication is that he has coagulopathy of trauma. We know that he's got clinical signs of shock. He's bleeding. The thromboelastogram indicates hyperfibrinolysis. In the future, we will be able to do a personalized pre-hospital MTP. The HEMS team are on the way. You can hear they're coming overhead. It's quite distracting. It's noisy. There's potential for chaos. When they arrive, interactions can be strained. They can be difficult. It is not always easy. It's just taking slightly longer than usual. That's normal. We're just looking for a landing spot. And hopefully they'll find that spot very quickly. Not to worry. Okay. We have a slight technical problem. That's okay. Okay, let's rewind. It wasn't the helicopter, it was the drone that was arriving. Okay, so the drone has arrived from the trauma center. The patient has been extricated from the car. They will do their, we also know through the interaction from the HEMS team to the ground team, there's a suite of procedures and interventions that are going to occur. They know what that is, they're getting the patient ready. They will continue to do their resuscitation. In the trauma center, the trauma team leader and the trauma team, in fact, can see how this is going. They know what his vitals are like. They know what the data is. They can prepare. There is no miscommunication. Miscommunication is prone to error, it's prone to delay, it's prone to indecision, and it affects patients. I'd just like to point out at this point, we are not Cirque du Soleil, as you can see. We're just a bunch of paramedics and doctors. Okay, so as the HEMS team arrive, there is no need for further introduction. There is no need for a handover. The team have already been briefed. They've briefed one another. There is no mission momentum loss. There's often a capacity for mission momentum to lose or to evaporate in the first few minutes once a new team arrives. There's all kinds of human factors that go on. This technology interface eliminates those human factors. As you can see, the team here are going through their RSI checklist, and the HEMS crew member arrives, completes a primary survey. They already know it. She already knows what the vitals are. She knows what these guys are doing. She knows they're doing an RSI checklist. She's just confirming and doing further clinical examination. They will proceed and do a rapid suite of interventions, and they'll get the patient to the trauma center. We can turn that massive fan off if you like. So at the trauma center, the team are able to interact. His data analytics following resuscitation, he goes on and has a tube put in. He has a finger thoracostomy. He has blood products delivered. His analytics now give him a 98% chance of surviving the 25-minute journey to the trauma center. En route, the information coming from his TEG has informed the hematologist. The hematologist at the center is able to interact and specify the exact product types, but also able to prepare the team in the trauma center for the exact product types. There's no more need for shotgun massive transfusion protocol. En route, they constantly interact with one another, and they agree that his response has been enough that he can go to the IR suite. There's no miscommunication. Okay, folks, you can finish that and just come up around behind me. Just finish that and come up around behind me. Okay. Okay, so Paul made it alive to the trauma center. He successfully had his spleen and liver embolized, and he went home to his family. So technology is not something to be feared. Computerized algorithms and computerized decision-making assistance in medicine are not to be feared. There is always going to be a need for clinical input and clinical examination. It's just that our decisions are now better informed. So we will never approach the pre-hospital response times or times to critical life-saving interventions that John Hines achieved in his pre-hospital career. But we have to do better. Technology can help us to do it better. It's what our patients deserve. It's the right thing to do. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Brian. Very ambitious, very fantastic, and actually a piece of patient care that many of us do not witness and participate in. So thank you to all of you who sent comments and questions on Twitter. If we could have the slide up again to remind everybody of Aurelia's username, that would be helpful. Before we call up our next presenter, we're going to have a few questions and a few comments. Aurelia, what do you have for us?
The Twitter community was pretty excited about all those, well, new inventions like getting vitals from a monitor and dispatching by predicting injury. Also, some people said that's slightly Orwellian. I liked the neologism. But especially the POCUS people asked, why not train the paramedics in POCUS interpretation? It might be easier than only acquiring the image.
Yeah, so that's hello. Yep, that's a good point. So I think you hear that a lot about expertise in an area and training expertise. So I think the issue is some procedures or some bits of equipment are easy to train and easy to use. But I think the role of telemedicine essentially is going to only increase. We know that expertise in interpretation of CT scanning or interpretation of remote surgery even, or how to do a procedure remotely is the way. Sure, you can train. This is not paramedics v doctors. This is about using technology. So I don't think necessarily, can you train absolutely everyone to be an expert level of ultrasound? I don't think so. So what I'm trying to, I suppose, demonstrate is we can use simple technology to back up that person. It's not that you're trying to take any skills away or you're trying to negate what they're trying to do. There's constant feedback. So I don't think it's that binary of train everyone or not train everyone. I think there's somewhere in between.
And a second question.
Somebody asked if our trauma response systems are, they said poor, but maybe not that advanced yet. Aren't we maybe the wrong audience? Couldn't, for example, car manufacturers make a much bigger impact?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there is some work being done. We all know that some cars that you probably have will automatically, if you crash a car, there's some data in there that will tell an emergency dispatcher that something has occurred. The problem is that interface with the ambulance services and also the severity of injury. So if you've got a car accident, as I was demonstrating, the kinematics alone is not enough. You don't know yourself if you're badly injured or not necessarily. You may not be conscious. You may have got out of the car. So there is still a gap there. We still need some further information to tell if someone has been critically injured or not. I don't think it's quite there yet.
Great. Big round of applause for Brian.